I
You
cannot
can,
start sharing
yes,
right
I
now.
will allow you to share and yeah, 1 second. Okay,
Now,
great.
I
So you can share now.
can you see my screen?
Yeah.
And oh wait, I will unplug that so that
So first of all, yeah,
hmm, no, right
feel
now.
free to talk about more about your position and where you
All
come.
right. Yes. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. So indeed, well, thanks for the invitation. I think I'm a bit of an outlier, but I hope it's okay because I'm not really an urban person. I would say I'm a
Yeah.
digital communities person, and both maybe at the theoretical or level and at the practitioner level. I made a talk that is honestly pretty descriptive compared to maybe usual talks. It's not going to be network theory so much, but so let me show you. And what I wanted to begin with was actually, because I wanted to try to stick and make some comparison with at least some city-centric and urban-centric aspects. And for some time now, I've been on this platform, this digital platform called Mes Voisins in France, My Neighbors, which is pretty extraordinary because it allows you, this is where I live and this is my surroundings, and it allows you to connect with your neighborhood, with only your neighborhood. So it's not a social network for family or friends, it's only with the neighbors. And so it defines the neighborhood as your social network, and then you can exchange, post, provide opportunities, events, etc. And it really changed the dynamics locally of the community. And I thought it was an interesting example of something that bridges, in a way, what I'm going to talk about, which is dynamics of digital communities and urban life, by actually providing a bit the best of both worlds. One world being, well, the fact that you live close by and can actually meet, and the other one being the fact that you can get, very simple information about potential opportunities around you. But so what my main topic of interest is online communities that have been producing knowledge or resources like software engineering. This is a picture of Linux, and Linux is interesting because it's an operating system for for computers and also for smartphones. And if you go to GitHub, where there is a source code of Linux, you see that there's an infinity of contributors. There's been this ability to scale, actually to 17,000 contributors, but it's an extremely large scale of community of contribution around a similar product. And it's completely open, and there's something beautiful about that community, and you can go online. They have actually made visuals with a tool called Course. I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah.
But you can see this process of growth, and you've talked about growth of roads and growth of cities. What I'm interested in is that over 20 years, you had the growth of a community around a theme, and they left traces which are here, files and ordered file ecosystem and folders, etc. And they wander around. They literally wander around that file and make it grow in the same way that a city is. And sometimes they reorder things and they destroy some parts and change it and make it more efficient, etc. And there's many roles that are devoted to that. And there's also, and I'm going to talk about that later, some politics involved in coordinating all these communities. So we've seen the example with Linux of the first kind of open communities of people coming a bit freely to these spaces and contributing. We're seeing that more and more also in science now. One reason being first that there's more and more people collaborating around topics in science. So the mean number of authors per article is more than 7 now. Some articles are hundreds of authors. This is one article where, like, this is here only the B, right? This is only A and the beginning of B of the authors. So there's people that are massively coming together to collaborate, and that's a map of scientific collaboration across the world. And that creates also these new spaces, these virtual spaces of exchange that exist online around knowledge. but beyond the traditional science, and that's going to be the focus of what I'm showing today, we had this new open science where, especially since the World Wide Web, things, knowledge, like artifacts from science become more and more open access, meaning that they are part now of the public space. Anybody can actually read them and take them for going further into studying something. And I was discussing before about Galaxy Zoo as an example of such an interaction between citizens and scientists. But this is something for the past 20 years that has happened in literally any possible space in science. It's the era of communities. You have mathematical communities that have solved theorems together, makers, DIY biologists, health communities, like self-research in chronic patients, etc., that are coming together. And something that has been observed, and there's a beautiful book about the scaling of these communities, is that it's you know, when you're a tribe, things are simple. But when you become a city with millions of people, things get more complicated. And so you need to design an architecture that allows for it to be simple to navigate. And that's the same for communities. What was observed is that when a community scales and you begin to have hundreds of people, thousands of people working on something in common, it becomes very hard to know what's going on, to understand, you know, to pay attention just to where to focus your attention. And what Michael Nielsen came up in this book was a nice wording, that is the fact that we need an architecture of attention in those virtual spaces, so that when you arrive, you're directed in a way to what's interesting for you. You can visually know where to best go according to your own need, and where you can best also bring your talents, right? And so that's on this basis that we try to do something with a platform that I will present, where we're trying to design in a way a space where we can create such an architecture of attention, and we can lead people in large communities to the place where they can best do something. So you can think of it as really an architecture for such open science spaces. And what I'm showing here is not a real space, it's a network space. It's a space of people being connected to other people and seeing other projects and seeing, you know, so it's a space built on relations that are not spatial, but that are connections. So this is the social platform we've designed, called Just One Giant Lab. It's a social network that is mostly devoted to these non-institutional communities that don't necessarily have already existing grants to create projects together. And it looks very much like a social network. You can follow people, you can clap, you can comment, and you get things that are shown to you in this space, you know, that you can interact with, for example, needs that others have that you can go and help. So we try to maximize the interface between people and by creating, especially showing what they need and showing that to people who can solve that. And people can show also what they do, so people can showcase their projects, and you can follow project and get news about it, etc. So an example of the application of such a space was a recent program that was done during the COVID crisis called the Open COVID-19 program. And it was quite something interesting, because in the span of only a few weeks, we had, you know, a few thousand people coming to the platform, and more than 1,000 of them actively contributing to projects collaboratively. And here I'm describing a bit how this happened. The first thing you see, and that's from data from a communication channel from Slack, where the community was active, is a boom and bust, or like I would say a boom and stabilization of a sub-community that is due to this exogenous shock of a strong need at some point, a strong crisis at some point, and a need for solution. And it's very similar to a process you observe for a certain type of urban cases, which is that was observed in the gold rush era in California. That's an example of a city that I went to a few years ago in California, a ghost city called Bodie. And Bodie was a big city in the gold rush era. And when you go there, you visit and you see there was this huge increase in 20 years of the population from 2 to 10,000. And then and sorry for the scale, it's kind of a weird scale, but this is not linear. For the next 40, 50 years, you had this slow decay of the city. So you observe the same dynamic of like a neat exogenous shock. Everybody comes, and then there's this kind of slow process where people live there for some time and organize. And what's interesting with that, if you study, and there's some studies on the population during that gold rush, is that you see several types of population. First, you have the miners, but then you need to feed those miners, right? So you have farmers, and you have shepherds, and you have carpenters, because you need to make houses. So you see a whole dynamics of a series of needs at a very short time span. And I'm not an urban specialist, but I would expect that over centuries, if you take 500 years or 1,000 years, you would observe the same type of thing, maybe for the dynamics of very archaeological dynamics of cities. That's here you see that on a very short time span. So we observed a bit the same thing, where initially you had the gold nugget, right? You had people doing biology, you had the lab notebooks that were open. And then we observed people coming and organizing governance. So that was kind of the politics getting organized. The immigration, the new people coming. So introduction was the biggest moment. The size of the names, sorry, here is what was the channel that had the most importance during that particular week in our Slack, where the communications were happening. And then you have people working on different projects. So each time you had a project that was gathering inertia, gathering momentum, sorry, and gathering people, organization of the communications towards the outside world. And all that was happening on a week basis. So you had this very fast pace. And so there were, I'm just going to describe a bit what happened in those two main phases of the evolution of that community. The first phase was the boom, the birth. And you know, there was a call to action on the internet for the community to take action in an open fashion. But what was really driving a lot of the, how to say, little exogenous shock in the early phase of contribution was synchronization of the community. So strong synchronization during community call, strong and regular synchronization of the community to know what's going on. So that was kind of like, suddenly you see a space of what everything is working on, and that allows you to kind of, you know, welcome you into that community. And after that, what's very hard is to get that going for these type of communities. And what we implemented for the months afterwards was a system of microgrants. Very, very small amount of money, like 2,000 or 3,000 euros attributed to projects for them to get going. And we did that in a scientific way by creating a review form, and the community could peer review other projects. And then we could rank them according to feasibility and impact, so that we could attribute money to get projects go across months and not just for like the first initial stages. And that allowed it to be really, it's still ongoing, and some projects are now getting to industrialization.
Mark, I will post a link in the chat to the platform, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. And so, yeah, that's just an example where we use data to actually track the effect of such microgrants on the activity of projects that are attributed the microgrants, so you can see the impact of that on their activity. And so finally, I wanted to represent that space of the community that was gathered, and that's quite interesting. So here people are linked by the conversation they have. So you can see first that we have an actual connected community. And you can see on the periphery are the different projects that were going on, from engineering to development and to biology. And there's two things you can note in that, is that first, you can see the politics going on, which is the coordination, the organization, the structuration of such a large community. And that's a huge effort, especially in a short span of time. That's an absolute cost and difficulty to put into action. And that's where algorithms can help and lubricate that process. And the other thing you see, and I can zoom in, is the immigration, which is welcoming new people that haven't been in that community yet and need to be embedded into that existing network, right? And that's where you need to design strategies of documentation, organigram, for people to get an understanding of that space they're getting into. And I think these two concepts visually represented here can easily be brought also to the urban concept of becoming embedded into a space that you're new to and that has already been organized before you. All right, and to finish, and that's unfortunately something ongoing that I cannot show output from, but that are getting done now. There's a community of people I've shown you with interaction, but these people have different skills, and this is the skills you have on the platform of this community. So this is the talents of the people that are there. So you have biologists, data scientists, makers, and what's hard when you arrive there is to find the people that are relevant for you to make your project and to collaborate with. And so we created interfaces for that called needs, where people can say the skill that they need to actually better continue their project. And so we got funding from a collective intelligence agency to actually look at that and do an experimental test of how we can use the underlying networks that connect people to best provide the need to the person that can best solve this need. And we're using MetaPath, like it's similar to how Netflix sends you the best recommendation to your inbox to design that and to design the best recommendation for you. We don't have yet result because we're sending to production now, but the goal is to look at how these recommended proposition that are arriving to your inbox can increase the self-organization of the community, can increase engagement and collaboration with metrics that are, for example, did you answer a post or like a need from someone? Did that lead to long conversation, etc.? And here, so I'm staying on the big picture, but the goal is to provide experimental insights over how you can actually increase collective intelligence, self-organization, and also sustainability of these communities that are working on these collaborative projects, especially for such crises. So I'll finish with perspective, two things, because on the site, we're also doing research on that. First, that we're now trying to implement tools from the ecological literature to describe communities as multi-holistic ecosystems. And that's something that, for example, Brian Uzzi has already implemented for organizational network, and that has shown a very nice result on reproducing network properties such as nestedness in those contexts. And we're also working on how to map those virtual spaces as actual spaces you can look at. And that's something we're working with Luba, for example, with knowledge spaces where we're looking at the trajectories of scientists in a space, an embedding of the space of knowledge to understand the epistemic trajectories and how you can, like the exploration behaviors, the foraging behavior in those spaces, etc. Yeah, just have this final stage to just keep going, maybe the conversation, but to show that basically we're trying to transpose this concept of local ecosystem and local neighborhoods to these networked neighborhoods, these virtual neighborhoods, where people need also to organize the politics, immigration, to navigate those, and we need to provide tools for them that allows to, increase their user experience and increase their interaction. Voila, so that's what I had to say on my end. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marc. No, but you can leave the the screen if you want. And
yes, sure.
Are there any questions from network scientists or network lovers?
Yeah, I have a question actually. Are there any outcomes already of projects of this giant lab?
Yes, so there's one example. So many of the projects, there were two types of projects at the time in March. And there were projects that were more either mask design or syringe pumps, low-cost syringe pumps that were for hospital at the time, etc. That delivered output very early on because it was projects that were not as hard, but that didn't go to the stage of industrialization because that's a stage that was caught up very quickly by companies, etc. What was interesting was for the project that were on the biological diagnostics, which was really the birth of the community, which was low cost diagnostics for the virus. 4 of them got into the semi-final of the X Prize competition, which is a competition that allows to actually access the industrialization processes. And what was interesting also is that it was 4 projects that actually collaborated together, but explored 4 different ways to design those tests. So these are examples of projects that went to that phase. And for at least for COVID, so there was in the end a catch up by other, like by companies, etc., because there's obviously an interest for that. But we had other example last year for another program of projects that are for things that are not going to get funded by any company or have no interest whatsoever, but that were interesting projects. For example, we did a program on vaccination, and one of the projects was how to help refugees to actually track the vaccination, and because they're not locals anymore, they're literally in places where they have no contact with doctors that know them, etc., had to track their vaccination, and when they get the kids vaccinated locally, etc., had to keep all the records in one place. And so that's a project that is still ongoing, for example, but that was helped also by one of the research program. So that's the kind of project we could have pushed on that. But yeah, you're welcome to have a look, and we still have community calls going on, and there's still active community. So you're welcome also to have a look at that.
I definitely will. And yes, because it's always a problem for us at City Lab Berlin to keep on track of all the communities that we start going or we try to support. And I think it looks like a very interesting tool for us too.
Yeah. So we actually right now, the biggest thing we're trying to design for that project is it's 2 things. It's one is called the spaces, which are going to be organization spaces for actually taking your organization, putting the projects that are partner to this organization, animating with programs and challenges, etc. A bit like Kaggle is doing in a way. And in particular, the main point is how can we bring also visualization to monitor your community, such as things that I've shown you, like the growth and understanding what is growing, what kind of people you have, what are the skill sets, and this kind of network representations that summarize and embed information in a very simple visualization. We're trying to also have that as a monitoring dashboard to understand the community evolution.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Thank you. I'm still jealous of the visualization of Luis, by the way, because he's got such nice visualization.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question, actually, mostly regarding on the exploration of cognitive, different cognitive areas and so on, like the project that you showed that you're doing with Liuba. And I don't know, I'm interested also in this kind of how to apply some recommendation systems also to explore different areas of knowledge, because I think that might be an interesting path also, not just to recommend areas of, not just to recommend projects that can be, that we can participate on, but also some new knowledge areas to get into.
Well, so that's an incredibly very good question, because indeed there's 2 aspects. There's the matchmaking aspect, which is something where you want to recommend exactly what you're already fit to, which is right now what we're working on because it's a need. And the other one is the design of serendipity, which is like how to bring you somewhere very far, but there's something going, like a recombination that is going to be interesting, right? And so right now, the way we're doing that, at least with Liuba, is that we have taken data from archive to look at the emergence of fields, like to model fields like same thing, boom and bust. And so we have a way to rescale fields so that we know what is early and what is late. And so we're looking at the behavior of people very early in the field. And what we've seen is that indeed, the people very early on that field are people that tend to mix cognitively distant fields, right? There are people that have explored and bring back something. And so that the first thing is that indeed that's a behavior that is known for innovation. Now the problem with innovation is that you know that there's a lot of false positives. There's a lot of times that's basically there's a lot of like not necessarily interesting things that are going to get out of that. So it's high risk, but high reward, because potentially one of those is going to be of high impact. And basically, and that's something we don't have yet, but that's the direction we're looking at, which is the idea of epistemic trespassing. Some people are going to go somewhere and say stuff that they don't know about, and they're trespassing that field that have already existing knowledge. But some people are going to be able maybe to find a local specialist and merge ideas that are going to, you know, brew into something that is of interest. And the hypothesis is right now that we have with regard to that is that to be a good explorer, you need to find a local guide, like, you know, like basically like a couch surfing style. If I'm going to go somewhere and I meet a couch surfer, I'm going to go very quickly to know what the city is, and I'm going to very quickly exchange cultures, and that's going to yield to something potentially interesting. So we're analyzing this kind of coupling of trajectories in a way. And, you know, the successful might be that you couple explorers with locals, and that might prove much more efficient rather than just exploring everywhere and just, you know, trespassing territory. So that's the hypothesis right now, but that's something I'm very interested to discuss more if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely, because I don't know, I relate a lot with that, because coming from architecture and now doing network science and working mostly with physicists and mathematicians, it's quite important to have this guide that you said, and I think it's also something that it's missing on the other way around. And I relate with something that we were talking before, Liva, like if it's possible to go from the data science perspective to now work on the architecture, or to be trained as an architect or as an urban designer. And I think it is possible, but it's also a matter of finding this guide who can, get us into the field. So yeah, I'll be more than happy to keep chatting about it.
And because it's similar in a way, in our case, the objective function is creating knowledge output or creating, you know, innovation or projects at work. But in the case of architecture, it will be creating, you know, good standards of life, or like, you know, ability to have lively neighborhoods and things like that. So there's also an objective function. It's a different one though, but it's the same idea.
Yeah, I will share the contacts of our speakers later so that we're all connected. And I will welcome our next one. Thanks, Mark. And thanks for questions. Luis, Jessica, Florangel, and Primavera de Felipe. They are experts in two different fields, but they work together, which is again an example of this kind of serendipitous projects when people from different fields meet together. And the community which they designed is, I mean, I was honestly amazed when I visited it, because both it's interesting architecturally, interesting like science-wise,